Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to do my December wrap up. So again, another great reading month in December and I'm really looking forward to 2023 now and all the amazing books I'm hopefully going to read during the year. The first book I want to talk about is an audiobook that I was listening to kind of the end of November, start of December. And that was The Sin Eater by Megan Campisi, and this is a book that is set in historical fiction. It's more or less implied that it is set around the reign of Elizabeth I, probably more kind of in her when she's in her late 20s, early 30s, I would say. And we are following a young woman who is who's in a bad situation, and she ends up getting arrested when she tries to steal some bread to eat. And instead of being sent either to the gallows or sent to jail, she ends up being branded as something called the Sin Eater. And this means that everyone is almost kind of afraid of her. No one will speak to her. No one will look at her like in the eye. She's not supposed to speak to anyone ever again. And she is now something that when people are dying, they call the Sin Eater to their house and they confess their sins to the Sin Eater. And then the Sin Eater eats foods that represents different sins, and when these foods are eaten, the person is then sin free. The Sin Eater basically takes on the sins of everyone else. She soon finds that her new status, even though it feels like it's a very low one, she ends up finding that because a lot of people don't look at her, she's almost invisible in a lot of ways. She ends up getting access to different places that she never would have before, such as the palace. And when some noble women die in mysterious circumstances and she and her mentor go to listen to their sins and then eat their sins, she kind of starts figuring out that there might be something weird going on. It seems that someone might be murdering these women, and she starts investigating herself to see what is happening. This one I didn't have too much expectations on. I feel like I had heard some maybe negative reviews on it, so I was kind of almost expecting myself not to like it. But then I ended up really enjoying it. I really liked the fact that it was never really, some things around history were changed, like just some names of the monarchs and things that were happening. We were never really told whether they were living in a time of Christianity, but you would just hear things about like someone called the Maker and the Sun. So it was obviously supposed to be some form of Christianity, but it was never actually stated. And then for Queen Elizabeth, she was just known as Queen Bess as well. And I just really liked how those kind of things were done in terms of it wasn't really like hardcore historical fiction like factual times, but we knew enough that if you are a historical fiction reader, you could kind of guess the time period that this is set in. We really see this young girl, like she is young and she is in a really unfortunate situation at the start of the book, and we see her become so strong and so really mature by the end of the book. I actually kept forgetting she was the age she was. She definitely feels like someone who's much older than her age by the time this is finishing up. And I just liked seeing that kind of slow and steady progression of her own self-worth and her confidence and her belief in herself, in who she was and who she is as a Sin Eater as well. I ended up quite enjoying this one. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely read more from the author. After that I read a book called There by Tommy Orange. This is a book that is looking at kind of the, I think it's called like urban Native American population in parts of America. I think it was Oakland, but I can't quite remember now. But we are actually looking at, it's almost like we're looking at a bunch of different stories or snippets from a variety of different characters who are all connected in some way, and we are gearing up to an event at a powwow at the end of the book, and we know that something's going to happen at this powwow, and we're kind of meeting all these characters, going back into their pasts and seeing how their lives are all going to intersect at this powwow and what is going to happen. This one I really enjoyed. I haven't read too much in terms of, like, I guess the indigenous population in America and the Native American culture. I know like a little bit about it, but not too much. So I actually really enjoyed like reading this and kind of learning more than I knew before. Things like a powwow, I never even knew they existed. So that was really interesting for me as well. And since I've read this, I've seen that kind of like the word and the event around more, and I just always find that really interesting when you see something in a book and then you notice it in other places. Definitely a real kind of like almost tension, like a building of a tension coming up to the end of the book, where you know something big is going to happen. You don't know if characters are going to survive what is going to happen. And yeah, I really did like this. Really liked how the author portrayed like this type of community, and how a lot of the times there's so many people, they don't really have a choice about where their life takes them. They only have a very small, or they feel that they only have a very small selection of options. And yeah, I just appreciated getting this kind of point of view, I guess, and learning a little bit more. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, and this is like a Regency fantasy novel that I absolutely loved. It was like the coziest of the cozy books that I just really needed and really wanted, and I loved this from start to finish, and I feel like I just never stopped smiling and loving every single bit of what I read. I really enjoyed my reading experience of this, and I now really understand the hype. This book we are following Dora, who as a young girl she was cursed by a fairy, and because of that she now only feels everything with only kind of like half her soul. So it's almost like all of her emotions are very muted in some ways. She never feels like she can really portray anger or sadness or even happiness in a lot of ways, and she doesn't really feel things the same way as other people feel things, like love and fear and stuff like that. And because of that she sometimes maybe like embarrasses her family at different things, such as like this is like Regency era, so things that like balls and you know, different courting situations. Her family are always kind of, her aunt is always kind of a little bit embarrassed about what she's going to do and if she's going to ruin her cousin's chances of a good marriage. And eventually they go to London for her cousin to try and find a husband for her cousin. And Dora ends up going with them, and they meet this man who is kind of the Lord, I think it's a Lord Magister he is, but he's basically like a magician, and he is like the magician of the royal family, the biggest magician of them all. But again, people kind of look at him a little bit oddly, as he doesn't really go with customs like of the time, and you know, he looks down upon like kind of, I guess, the elite and the wealthy, and he doesn't really pander to them the way other people would. And Dora and him kind of strike up this friendship, and he says he's going to help Dora in terms of maybe regaining full sense of her soul again. And the two of them work on different things, and obviously they start getting closer and closer. But I just really love this. I loved the romance that was in it. I loved the soft building up of the romance and the feelings between Dora and her love interest. And then also I really loved the elements of magic and the elements of like fairy tale and fairies in this as well. And yeah, I just loved everything about this, and I really can't wait to read more in this series, as I do think they all kind of are spin-off series and they do follow like characters who may have shown up in this one. So yeah, I'm really excited to read more, because I just really love this writing. It was just so cozy and lovely. And then I read my first Christmas book of the season, and that was A Merry Little Meet Cute by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone. And this one is kind of different from other Christmassy books I've read, in that we have a character who is a plus size main character, but also she works in the porn industry, and I found that really interesting element in this book. So we are following Bee, who ends up getting cast as the lead role in this Christmas movie, and she's cast opposite this ex boy band member who's obviously kind of like grown up now, and she used to have a massive crush on him when she was a teenager, so she's kind of excited to be in this main role now with opposite her teen crush. And also she also has to kind of keep her other side of her work a secret, because she is a porn star and something that is very similar to something like OnlyFans, and she is really popular on that, and she doesn't want like people outside of that industry, I guess, knowing what she is doing, so she can try and make it as an actress in like these like other nicer kind of Hallmark type movies. I do think with this one it was a little bit unrealistic, because I do find that like it's the internet, people are going to know, like people are definitely going to find out who you are. And yeah, I found it really unrealistic to think that she would be able to hide her sex work, like her past as a sex worker. So do find it kind of unbelievable that she would end up in something like a Hallmark movie. I was like, it would just never happen in real life, even though, you know, I believe that like it should be able to happen, but I just couldn't see it happening in real life. But all that aside, anyway, she ends up on this movie, and but Nolan actually ends up knowing exactly who she is, as he's one of like the bigger subscribers to her only like her I guess type of OnlyFans channel. So he knows exactly who she is, and there's a lot of chemistry between the two of them from the start, but they don't want to get into things for like a variety of different reasons, but they kind of have to just hold off on all the lust and the chemistry building up between them. This one was okay for me. I really thought I would like it more, and I did find myself just not really loving it for the majority of the book. I found that so Bee is not the only person, like character in this book, that is in the sex work industry. There's a lot of other characters, from like just like costume people, set people, cameramen, like lighting, all of that kind of stuff, makeup, that end up like all knowing each other. They all end up working on this movie together, and I did just find that there was so much sexualization of everything. I thought like everything that this book was trying to do in terms of positivity for the sex work industry, it ended up taking like two steps forward, five steps back by the way it was like sexualizing everything, and even just talking about like sex all the time between the characters, and everything the characters like did, everything was about sex, and everything ended up being like dirty or um cheesy, like sexy cheesy in like in some kind of way, and I just really really didn't like it, and it really threw me off, and I felt kind of almost repulsed by it in different ways, and it just really annoyed me because I was like I can see what the book is trying to do, but it's just not doing it the way it should be. So yeah, I just felt it really did a disservice to the sex work industry by making a caricature out of everyone. And then I do agree with some other reviews that I've seen where I didn't believe in the love between B and Noah or Nolan as main characters. They were definitely like in lust. They definitely like really, 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 really wanted to have sex with each other. And there were some like even some of the sex scenes I didn't really like as well. And there was this whole thing about Nolan constantly relieving himself using a gingerbread lotion, and I was like, why would you do that? I don't know. So yeah, there were just a lot of elements of this that I just really didn't like. And also the fact that they were filming a Christmas movie in December. And I was like, everyone knows Christmas movies are made in June, July. It's just a thing. We all know when Christmas movies are actually made. Why would you make it in December and then have a whole year before you're going to put it out? Like, do it in June, July, and then you're able to put it out that year for Christmas. I don't know. So some of those technical elements as well just didn't work for me. So I gave this like a 2.5-ish, 3 stars. So yeah, unfortunately, it just wasn't a hit for me. And then I read a book that I loved, and that was a reread, and that was Nemesis Games by James S.A. Corey. This is, I think, the 5th book in the Expanse series, and I really, really enjoyed this one. This is the one book in the series where we really see the characters, all our main characters, completely separated from each other. And they're not just separated by like a little bit of distance, they're separated by like literal planets. There are planets between them, and then there's a lot of like really, like as a lot of things in this book goes, there's a lot of really really life-threatening situations that happen, and each of the characters are all in different life-threatening situations, and we really don't know for a while if any of them are going to make it through and if they'll ever be reunited as well. And because the fact they're all on these like different journeys by themselves, we also find out a lot more about the pasts of some of our main characters who aren't just Holden, who's kind of been like a central character for the whole book. We really get to know the rest of the crew of the spaceship Rocinante that we're following in the series, so I really really enjoyed that. And then also we kind of are introduced to a new kind of big bad like organization in this book as well, who become a lot more relevant in later books. So yeah, I just really really enjoyed this one. It was one of my favourite books the first time I read the series, and it's still one of my favourite books now, so 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it. Then I read another Christmas book from someone who is becoming a very Christmas read staple for me, and that was Jenny Bayliss, and this is her newest release, which is Meet Me Under the Mistletoe. And in this one, we are following a character called Nori, who, I'm going to be honest, I found it really hard not to picture Nori, the like hobbit creature from the Lord of the Rings TV show, when I was reading this, because two Noris, but we are following Nori, who is going to a wedding of a school friend of hers, and she's going back to her town that she grew up in. She went to kind of on a scholarship. She went to this like fancy boarding school that was in her town, and she was able to go on like a local scholarship. So she's still friends with a lot of her school friends from this time, and she's going to a wedding of 2 of her school friends in this kind of like a castle in her local town. She ends up reuniting with the gardener in the castle grounds, who they knew him when they were younger as well. His name is Isaac, and she ends up kind of reuniting with him and getting to know him again, and there's like chemistry between the 2 of them. So during the week of the wedding, she's kind of getting to know Isaac more and more, and learning more about him and what he was doing in the time like they were students, and then growing up, and how he ended up back in the same town and doing the job that his dad did in this castle grounds. And Nori is telling him about her life as a bookstore owner, and we just see this really really sweet like romantic relationship form between the 2 of them. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. It was very sweet, it was very cute. It definitely wasn't like my favourite Jenny Bayliss. I definitely still think her first one, The 12 Dates of Christmas, is definitely my favourite, But this one was very, very sweet, and I would definitely recommend it to people who are just looking for a nice Christmassy read. And it's not super Christmassy either. It kind of starts at the end of November and does like the run up to Christmas, but it's not, it's more like wintry and magical more so than super Christmassy. There was like the third act breakup was a little bit, I don't know, it was very dramatic. I did understand why it happened, but I also felt like it was kind of almost overly dramatic in a way. And yeah, again, if the characters had just kind of communicated it a little bit better, it wouldn't have happened. And I did find it a little bit frustrating, but overall, this was good. I gave it like a 3.5 to 4 stars as well. And again, I will continue to read Jenny Bayliss, as I always just really enjoy her novels. I enjoy the characters and like the lives that she sets up with them. I find them just really lovely characters that like really come to life very easily. And again, I really always love the settings of her books as well. And I think she's just a really great way of creating settings, whether they be towns or villages like in her other books. And in this one in particular, I feel like the castle she did really, really well. But also I think the bookstore that Nori owns, the way she brought that to life and described it, it was really, really lovely. And I wish it existed in real life so I could visit it. Then I read Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. TJ Klune is an author I've heard quite a lot about, and this is the first book of his that I've read. And this one is kind of a magical realism book, and it's not Christmassy, but it definitely has kind of some elements of like Scrooge, Christmas Carol to it. So yeah, I definitely got like some Scroogey feels from the main character in this, whose name is Wallace. He is in his early 40s, I think, and he's not a very nice man. He's a lawyer, and he's never really treated anyone around him particularly well. And then he ends up dropping dead of a heart attack, and he comes back as a ghost, but he is brought to this place that's kind of like a tea shop in the middle of nowhere, and this is kind of almost like a way station or a waiting station for restless spirits or ghosts before they move on to wherever they go next. And there is a human person who takes care of this tea shop, and he also is charged with looking after these ghosts and talking to them and kind of figuring out like their lives and their likes and dislikes and what might be holding them back from moving forward and seeing what's next for them in their afterlife. And Hugo and Wallace obviously start forming a really close relationship that turns romantic, and Wallace obviously is a ghost, Hugo is a human, so like how can it work out? So we just see that relationship progress throughout the book, and we also see a lot of character progression with Wallace. He starts off as this like really grumpy, horrible man, and he becomes really soft and really lovely and a really like good friend as well as a partner by the end of the book. And yeah, that was just lovely to see. I thought the cast of characters in this was really, really nice as well. The magic system, the way the ghosts work, that was really nice too. We kind of got like a little bit of a sense of like how it all worked, but I think you just kind of had to really focus on the tea shop and the characters themselves and don't think too much about the wider world of it. But I still did really, really enjoy it. And yeah, this was fine. I just didn't absolutely love it, to be honest. And I found myself getting a little bit bored of it about halfway through, but I still did love kind of the whimsy of it, and the relationship as well was really, really sweet. And I will definitely be going on to read more TJ Klune because his writing was really, really nice, but this one itself just wasn't a favourite for me, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Listened to an audiobook which was another Christmas book, and that was Christmas in the Snow by Karen Swan. Karen Swan is also another Christmas staple for me. I've really, really enjoyed her Christmassy books the last few years. This one is a backlist book from her, but it was just one I was able to get on audiobook, so I said I'd give it a go. And this one we are following a character called Allegra, who is like this high-flying professional woman who is in kind of in like a finance industry. And Karen Swan is really, really good at doing these like wealthy professional white women who have it all basically, except for maybe like a couple, like a really meaningful relationship in their life, or they're not particularly good. They're like succeeded everything else in their life except the romance stakes, and she's very, very good at creating these women, and Allegra was no different. So we are following Allegra as she is dealing with things in her job, and this new guy comes into her job called Sam, who she has a little bit of a thing with, but then he ends up becoming her rival for this big deal. So things kind of get a little bit nasty between them, so it almost goes from like lovers to enemies to lovers again in a way. And then she also has things going on in her personal life. Her and her sister are looking after the mother, who is unwell. She has early onset Alzheimer's, so she's in a care home. And then they get this call from the police in Switzerland, who say that they have found a body that's like years and years and years old. It was hidden under a bunch of snowdrift in this like little hut on the mountain, and they said that the body is their grandmother, and they're saying like that can't be true because our grandmother, like we knew our grandmother, she died when we were younger, we have no connection to like this little town in Switzerland, like what are you talking about? But then as they discover more, it turns out that this person was their biological grandmother, and they have to go to this town to kind of find out more about this woman, who she was, and what happened to her. And we kind of see both Allegra's personal side of life and her professional side of life. They all converge in this town during this kind of like skiing holiday / like family investigation that she does. And yeah, we see it all kind of come together. I really enjoyed this one. I always think Karen Swan, her writing is just very, very tight. I always like the characters and the stories that she comes up with. I really just like the look back at this as well, about family and about what happened. There was a kind of like that mystery element of it as well that just kept me intrigued. And yeah, I did quite like the romantic relationship in it as well. It wasn't too, like there was a lot of chemistry there, but it wasn't too like dramatic either. It was kind of, you kind of understood the animosity between them for a while, and then there was also this kind of mystery going on with her in her job as well, in terms of like trading or some sort of like dodgy trading, that kind of came to light at the end of the book that I thought was quite interesting as well. Yeah, this was good. I gave it a 4 to 5 stars, and I'm looking forward to whatever Karen Swan book I read next year for Christmas. I did a little bit of like a palate cleanser, so I decided to read the second book in the Ice Planet Barbarian series, which is Barbarian Alien, and this one is basically a carbon copy to the first book, except we kind of already know what happened in the first book about these group of women who are abducted by these little aliens, and then the spaceship that they are on, that they're being like kept on by these little aliens, crashes onto this other planet, and then they find these other aliens who are like these big blue hunky aliens, and then there's like this weird thing, kind of like an imprint thing, where some of these big blue hunky aliens imprint on the human women, and the human women imprint on them, and they become like soulmates and like sexual partners, and the sex is really great, and that's basically what the book is about. So we're following another character who is a bit more of a feisty character than the first one we followed, and she is really like, I don't care like what is happening, I'm not with this dude, like I don't care what he thinks, he's not putting his thing anywhere near me. And then she changes her mind fairly quickly, and then they have their little thing, and that's basically what it is. I still really enjoy, like I do really enjoy this book. It's mostly sex, it's mostly smut, but there are parts of like the alien culture as well, and just learning more about like the aliens and like their family and their tribe and what happened to them and their history, and then the planet itself, and how they're going to survive in the future. I find that quite interesting as well. Like I do actually quite like it. So yeah, I did enjoy this one. I will say it's been quite a while since I read the first book, so I think it helped the fact that it had been a while since then, so the story didn't feel extremely repetitive. I say if you're reading them very closely together, the story would probably get a little bit boring after a while. But yeah, I'm kind of glad to I'm kind of happy to read these every now and again when I just need a little bit of like a palate cleanser, just a little bit of like smutty fun or whatever. I'm glad to pick these up. So yeah, this was like a 3.5, 4 stars. Like I quite enjoyed it. So yeah, I have nothing to complain about. And then I read one last Christmas audiobook, and that was Honeymoon For One by Rachel Bowdler. And this is actually a queer lesbian Christmas kind of rom-com story. And I don't think I've read a lot of, if any, except this one, kind of queer Christmas romances. So that's definitely something next year I might try and prioritise, because I do know some came out this year that people were saying were really, really good. So this one is about a girl called Robin, who she is living in Manchester, and she ends up having to go on her honeymoon alone because she had proposed to her girlfriend and they were all set to get married, and then her girlfriend cheated on her and they broke up the engagement. And between all of the other cancelling all the other stuff, she ends up forgetting to cancel the honeymoon until like a week before, and she realizes she never did it, and she's going to lose all her money if she doesn't just go on this honeymoon. So she ends up going alone. And while she is in this like ski resort in Canada, she meets this ski instructor called Neve, and at first they have a little bit of like a prickly relationship, and then gradually they get to know each other and a relationship forms. But then obviously Robin is in Manchester most of the time and Neve is a ski instructor in Canada, so how are they going to like make it work between them? So we kind of see them figuring that out throughout the book. And I will say the book, it was good. It wasn't great. I found it dragged a lot, particularly by the end of it. I felt it really, really dragged. And then the relationship itself was very like chaste and very like sweet for most of the book. And then you're like the very, very end, there's like a sex scene that just comes like the very last chapter, before the epilogue, there was like this sex scene, and I just felt it felt was really misplaced. I was like, why wasn't that like in the middle of the book? It just felt really weird that it came right at the very end. And yeah, I just didn't really like that. And yeah, I think the story could have just like the pace of it could have just been a little bit better. And yeah, like the third act breakup as well. It dragged on a little bit too long as well. I would have liked it had been a little bit like snappier in terms of getting back together. And then the epilogue as well. The epilogue was just like dragging on the story so much. I was like, okay, like we're finished, like we get it, like they're together, they're happy, like they've worked it out, fine. So yeah, it was fine, it just wasn't great, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. And then the last book I read in 2022 was The Tiger Catcher by Paullina Simons. And this one is one I've had on my bookshelf since 2019. I actually have the whole trilogy because the author sent them to me herself and like she signed them. She signed all the books, like I have a personal signature on all the books, which was really, really nice of the author because I love her book, The Bronze Horseman, that trilogy, which I've actually found out from this, there's actually 2 more books that I've never read in that series. But the main trilogy, the Bronze Horseman trilogy, is like one of my favourite books of all time. I absolutely love it. I talk about it all the time. I rave about it. So people already know. So I've had this since 2019, this book, and I've been afraid to pick it up because I was like, I know nothing is ever going to compare to The Bronze Horseman. Like, it's just not going to be, it's completely, obviously this is a completely different story, completely different characters, not connected in any way to The Bronze Horseman, but I was still afraid of picking up anything else from the author because I was like, oh, I'm not gonna like it as much. But eventually I decided I would pick this one up because it actually fulfilled the last challenge I needed to tick off for the Pop Sugar challenge. So I decided to give it a go, and it was okay. Not great, but I will say by the end of the book, I did actually feel a lot more invested in the story than at the start, and I will probably read the next book. So yeah. So in this book one, we are set in LA and we're following a man called Julian. He's like in his late 20s. And he's fine, he's like living his life, and then he ends up meeting this actress called Josephine, and he just falls head over heels in love with her. And within 2 months they're like set to marry each other. But it turns out that she's been keeping like quite a lot of secrets from him, and he thinks that they're going to break up, and then just as they almost reunite, she ends up dying really tragically, and he kind of completely loses his way, becomes really, really depressed. He ends up moving to London, and he's convinced that he will find her again some way, even though she's dead, because he's been having some dreams. And he ends up finding someone who, it's kind of this, I don't know whether you call it like some sort of weird magic, where he finds out that Josephine would have lived a few different lives before the life she had with him. So he ends up finding this way to like travel back in time to find her in different lives. So in this one, he ends up traveling back to like just at the end of Queen Elizabeth's, like literally just as Queen Elizabeth dies and King James comes through, so like 1603 or something like that. He ends up going back to there and finding Josephine again in this era, and trying to be with her again, in a way he wasn't able to in his own time. So yeah, I really like the concept. I really like the time travel elements of it. And by the end of it, I did feel quite invested in the story and like what was going to come next, and more where he would go next in time, if you know what I mean. I feel like kind of I want to read the next book to know where he ends up and what time period he ends up in. But I will say Josephine as a character was she felt very almost manic pixie dream girl in a way. I felt like we never really know who she is. We only ever see her through Julian's eyes and Julian's perception of her, which we know from all the things he finds out about her. He never really knew who she was, and the love, it was just like we were very much like told about this love between them, and I feel like I just didn't believe in the relationship, and I just didn't really get why he was so obsessed with her. And then the way he acts after she dies was just like, I understand grief, and there was like this big element of obviously grief and not being able to move on, but then the way he kind of treated himself and then treated all the people around him and all his friends, it was just really pathetic in a way and just really horrible, and I just really didn't understand him at all. I was like, why would you treat yourself like this? You know, your loved one would never want you to do that, so why are you treating yourself like this? It just kind of annoyed me. And then I did find that there were some elements of like the time travel when he does go back to like the 1600s, and the way he was like talking to the people, the family, and that he ended up working for, who was like the family of who Josephine would have been at the time, this time period. I found it really unrealistic, the way they talked to him and the way he was able to talk to them and the way he was able to fit into their lives. I was like, considering he's looked at as almost like, you know, a peasant like person, there's no way there would have been this like familiarity between them. Like, it just doesn't make sense at all. So yeah, there were some things I had to just be like, I don't know if I believe in this. So yeah, it was okay, it just wasn't great. It was no Bronze Horseman, but I always knew it wouldn't be. So yeah, I've given it a 3 out of 5 stars. But I do feel intrigued enough to read the second one, so I'll probably read the second one at some point during this year maybe. So yes, that is all the books I read in December, and that concludes my 2022 reading. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys have read any of these books, I would love to know. I would love to know books you read in December. Did you read any Christmassy books that you would recommend for me to read next year? I would love to know. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys again next time.